Okay, hi everyone. This is Mikiko, and she's here for my first Superlative Sunday, I think. So I think it'll go up on Sunday. So yeah, and today we're going to be talking about impressionable books, whether they made an impression or not.
Yes.
So would you like to introduce what you're going to be talking about?
Sure, thank you. So I was thinking about the superlatives that you mentioned, and I was
Yeah.
thinking about what books were the most impressionable from 2022 and what were the least impressionable. And it made me think because obviously this is a very broad and not really, well, I mean, it's unique, a unique superlative because it's so broad, but could mean anything to anyone. So obviously this is subjective and it's the parameters are kind of parameters that I drew. So, take what I'm saying with a grain of salt. And if anybody was thinking about this, I'm sure it would be tailored to their tastes. But I was
Absolutely.
thinking, yeah, but I was thinking about, what makes a book impressionable for me. And also, does that mean it's a favorite book, it's the best book, or whatever? And I came to the conclusion that books that I thought were, or that I felt were most impressionable were ones that I still thought about, but weren't necessarily favorites, but had kind of one of three things in them. What three components? So I was thinking the writing definitely has to be good. And for me, that's like, it's not one of these things, but it could be a combination of, but is it
Absolutely.
lyric? Yeah, is it
Oh,
lyrical? Is it like, is the descriptive writing well done? Are sentences varied, like style, type? Are you getting good dialogue? If there is dialogue, are you getting, I want to say like something that the writing fits the genre it's writing for and the
mm,
situations, whether that be, the
mm,
plots or plot or the character or
mhm.
character development. Does the writing fit that? Because if it doesn't, obviously it doesn't work. Does it fit the perspective or the narrative perspective and things like that? So that's one of them. And then the other one is something more like, is it making me feel emotional? Now, it doesn't need to be like
Oh.
sad, but like,
Mhm.
is it evoking something like it could be just as easily anger or disgust or something like that? Is it making me feel joy, sadness,
Right.
whatever? And then what was the third thing that I wrote down? Um, Maybe I didn't write it down. I guess it was just if I still think about it, if I can still remember it and it's still there, you know, and not just can I remember it, but can I remember how I
Right.
felt when I read it, right?
Right.
Um, and there were probably 7 out of 2022 that I could pick off the top of my head.
Wow.
Yeah, it was interesting
Wonderful.
because I listed everything in or I had everything listed in Goodreads from, the 2022 reading challenge. And I thought, like, which ones do I still think about that if somebody said, what should I read? And I could tell them why, what would those be? And the 7 were 2 that I've actually talked with Shawn about on Shawn the Book Maniac's channel, which are Bridget Brophy's The Snowball. So kind of modern
Oh,
classic, published in 1964.
okay.
Yeah. And then Fayne, which is a new publication from last year,
Yes.
by Anne-Marie MacDonald, the big chunky one. I don't know if it's getting a lot of hype, but I love Anne-Marie MacDonald. So I was just there and I requested it from NetGalley right away. I was like, please,
Wow.
please, please let me read this.
Yes.
Um, what else? Oh, Clare O'Day's Voting Day, which was published in 2021, but it republished by Fairlight Books, I think, in 2022. I know it's a republish in 2022, but I did receive it from NetGalley as an ARC.
Wow.
Um, I read Eimear McBride's A Girl is a Half-Formed Thing, which I know a lot of people don't
Oh,
like, which is absolutely fair, for whatever reason. But I really loved that. And I thought it was like one of those books that after I'd read it, it just packed such a punch that I just sat there and just going, oh
wow.
my gosh, like my heart was breaking. And
Yes.
then Foster by Claire Keegan, which I think you've also read.
I no, I
Or no,
haven't
have you
read
read
any Claire Keegan,
Claire
but
Keegan?
she what made I followed the Booker this year, though I
That's
didn't read
right.
everything from the Booker. And so small things like these got a lot
These,
of,
that's right.
reviews because it made the Booker. So I
Yeah.
was like, oh, Claire Keegan. Like
Yeah.
she like all of a sudden was on my radar, whereas before the Booker, she was just like one of those authors that I had a very minute idea of what she wrote about. And then I was like, oh, she writes like sweet stories that pack an emotional punch.
Yeah.
That's what I've heard. And I was like,
Yeah. And I think you had talked about it as well with Fraser,
yes.
right? From Springboard Thoughts. And I think he said what a lot of people I've heard say, which is if you read Small Things Like These first, that's the book that you'll love. Whereas if you read Foster first, that's the one that you'll love. But I read Small Things Like These as an arc last 2021 and read Foster because everyone was, you know, oh, Clare Keegan, Small Things Like These, but I'd already read it. So I went out and got Foster and it was so good. But the story itself was just, it just, I don't know what it is. I think maybe I have a personal connection to it in terms of like, there's a young child who is left with people and you don't really know why she's left there, but she's kind of fostered by them for a period of time. So I think that was like, it was a bit of an emotional connection to me. So I felt that punch. And then the trees, which yeah. Oh my gosh.
I love that book.
Was so good. I did too, but it was one of those ones that has still stuck with me. And actually, I think I want to reread it.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Yeah. And
the banter is so sharp and witty.
It is, isn't it?
So I was like, and I was like, simultaneously, you're talking about this incredibly difficult topic, which I think it really gets in and amongst your emotions. And then all of a sudden you have this, like on the very next line, you have this like quip that's hilarious. And you're like, what?
Yeah. You start laughing. You're like, whoa, hold on a minute. I don't want to laugh about this. This is serious stuff.
I know. But it like, I think in a weird way, it made the book more impactful because you got these reprieves and could process almost. And then you would go back to the hard stuff. And then you would kind of get this reprieve and you're like, okay, you know, and so it was I thought that book was brilliant. And I thought I wanted it to win. That was my Booker winner.
And I'd never heard of Percival Everett prior to that. And I was like, whoa, where has this guy come from?
I know.
Why have I never heard about his writings?
He has like 25 books published or something. He's got a huge backlist. I know. It's amazing. Amazing. Yeah. All right. So, what else was on your list?
The last one in terms of I would say maybe positive impressions was The Palace of the Peacock, which was published in 1960. And that is Wilson Harris. And it came onto my radar because I just happened to get a Faber newsletter in my inbox, in my email inbox, and it was like a republished edition, and it's beautiful. I think I have it here. I do. It's so pretty.
Wow.
And it's just like, okay, I'll buy that. So I did, which I don't normally, but I was like, oh, I'll just buy that. But so I admit it was a cover buy, but then I read a little bit of the summary in the dust jacket, and it said, you know, it likens it to a more it's a more authentic version of Joseph Conrad's Heart of Darkness, which I really enjoyed. And so, and I believe that Wilson Harris is actually French. No, hold on a second. He was born in Antigua. Nope, sorry, that's Jamaica Kincaid. Sorry. No, he's British Guyanan. Yeah, he's British Guyanan. So I thought this would be interesting. And it was so good that I finished listening to it on audio and reading it. And then I started it again. I was like, oh gosh.
Wow.
Yeah. And I was like, oh man, it was so dark, but it was interesting because it's men navigating the landscape, same as Heart of Darkness.
Right.
And when it was done, it was just like, you know, I tend to live in remote places when I'm with my partner. And it was just kind of these man versus nature or human versus nature. And how do you kind of come to terms with that? But there's also a bit of magic realism. And so it was kind of hitting little hot spots for me. I do like magic realism. I know I know a lot of people don't like it. That's fair. But it was really interesting. And all of these men have secrets, and they're not, the holiest of men. So, they all have their demons that they're grappling with as well on this journey. And I think that it all comes to a head along this journey. So that one to me was like, how do you grapple with those ghosts? And I mean, even for me, I always think, how do you deal with those negatives? I'm really good at burying them. How do you deal with them?
Right.
So,
Right.
if I don't have to deal with them, life is fine. But I think that book is why it left a lasting impression on me. So
Ah, wow.
yeah. And then the
That's
ones that,
incredible.
yeah.
Yeah. Okay, go
Yeah.
ahead. Go
So
ahead. What's
no,
your
that's okay. The ones that were a bit like, they were impressionable, but I don't know if it's in a positive way. And I want to say the one that was weirdest was Bear, a novel by Marian Engel,
Oh.
which I had heard about on Shawn's channel, and I'm like, this is a Canadian classic that I've
Yes.
never read. I feel kind of badly, and I was like, I don't know what I'm getting into, but it seems that people are talking outside of, the kind of the bestiality. So I thought there must be something else to it. And I read it and I was like, oh, I feel very uncomfortable. And I still feel uncomfortable when I think about that book.
Wow.
Yeah, because there's part of me that thinks like, what was the point of the relationship? Is it just, did she pity the animal? Was she lonely? Is there consent, like
Yeah.
questions of consent? Like I find that very interesting, but I struggle with it. So I still think about that. And it also makes me think of oh shoot, I'm gonna forget the playwright, but it's the play Sylvia or the goat, or who is
Hmm.
Sylvia? Something along those lines. I think it's
Okay.
Edward Albee who wrote the
Okay.
play. But it's the same kind of discussion, where does the where is that line that divides consent and maybe feeling maybe things that are a bit odd to most people in terms of
Interesting.
feelings for an animal.
Yeah.
Anyway, and then the one
Huh.
that I think about with a lot of vitriol is another, actually one that's well loved, at least from what I heard, which was Cold Enough for Snow by Jessica Au, which was also published, I think, at the very beginning of 2022. And I think part of the problem for me was I received it as a NetGalley arc again, and it was an uncorrected proof. And between the kind of, I think, the summary on the summary from NetGalley, which I would assume is the kind of the summary on the back cover,
Yeah.
um, and then the really, really, like, the writing was just like incomplete sentences in which you can't really forgive the writer because you don't even know what's being said. So I just felt confused a lot of the time.
Hmm.
And I know that proofs can come to you uncorrected, and that's fine. But like, if you're carrying on a thought and I think it's something important and you stop and I have no idea what you're saying, and that continually happens, pulling you out of that reading experience. I mean,
Yeah, that's a
yeah,
negative experience right there
yeah,
because you're having to fill in the writer's like thoughts and trying to, whereas the writer is supposed to lead you somewhere, and you're not
right.
supposed to have to fill in. I had a similar experience with the Sappho poetry, which
Oh,
is
okay.
which was beautiful, and it's ancient, so it's like it's only fragments of this Greek
Of,
poet, but the way it was formatted, I wish it gave you a little more guidance to what
mm,
she was trying to say. But
mm,
instead, it was like, here's what's missing, and we'll give you the words that are there. And then I was like, but there was nothing I could get. I felt like I couldn't get anything from it
yeah.
unless I really inserted myself in it. And then I was like, but that's me,
Yeah, that's,
not the
yeah,
writer.
that's it. So it's like, what are you supposed to do with those moments? And I think
Right.
it's impressionable, but it's negative. So, and
Absolutely.
which then of course led me to, well, if something's not impressionable or unimpressionable, does that mean it's bad? Like, does that mean it's one of the worst books you read? Or is it, I don't know, is it the book that you've completely like all but forgotten? Like,
Right.
does unimpressionable equal unforget or forgettable? I was like, I don't know.
I
But I
don't
thought,
know.
I'll ask Shelley what she thinks.
I don't know because there were books that I felt that I put too much into it before reading it. Like
Oh,
I had my
okay.
expectations were so high that what the book offered was not meeting what I had expected.
Right.
And then there were times where I felt like it's a it's a learning curve in what I don't like.
Okay, fair
And
enough. Yeah.
and that was valuable. But then in some ways it's like I wish I didn't have to learn that lesson, you know? So I don't know, because there are books that I just forget. They're just
Right.
forgettable because they leave nothing. Whereas then there's ones that are probably like the Jessica Al book, where it's like you could articulate what you didn't like about it. And I feel like that's more valuable than something that was just middling, like middle of the road and forgettable.
Yeah.
So I don't know.
And I mean, I don't know if I had to go back and check, because I've tried to figure out how to do my star ratings on Goodreads and reviews. And I think, like many people, I'm still unsure of what to do.
Yeah.
So I try not to give star ratings and then leave reviews, and that would be helpful. Or I try to like leave a review, don't leave star ratings, don't leave a review, leave star ratings.
Right.
But I think there are books that it's like, it's hard to do either, because it wasn't good, it wasn't bad, it was just fine. And sadly, I don't know, I think maybe every year, most of my books kind of walk that middle of the road.
Right.
And I don't know if that's just me. And that's not to say that somebody else wouldn't enjoy them, but maybe it's just not what I tend to think is impressionable in a book. So, and I mean, the market's so saturated.
Oh, absolutely.
Right. So how do you know what I mean? I think the reality is you're going to have, like, the majority of your books are going to be middle of the road. So maybe those are the you know, least impressionable or the most unimpressionable books. But
right. Because it's even like if you felt something towards it, then it did make an impression, just not the one that you wanted.
That's it.
Yeah.
And so it's not necessarily a negative or a bad, or that there is no impression. There is an impression.
There is an impression.
Negative, right?
Yeah,
so that's why
fascinating.
I was stuck. Yeah. So that's why I thought, I'll let Shelley answer that question about unimpressionable, because it is tough, right? And I guess maybe if your 3-star reads are that kind of middle of the road, then probably a 2 to 3.5 or 2 to 3 might be your unimpressionable book,
right?
Whatever that may be.
Yeah, so, I don't know. I really don't know, because I know there are more books than not that really do walk that middle path, and there has to be something that triggers a memory that I read it. And I'm like, oh yeah, I did like that book, and this is what I liked about it, and then this is what I didn't like about it. But it wasn't so grand. I didn't have to really kind of work at what I did and didn't like. It was just like, this aspect was nice, and then this aspect wasn't. So it's interesting though. But then it's like, I wouldn't say that they're not bad books. They're not bad books. Right. They're good. They're doing what they're supposed to do. They're just not giving me they're not pushing me in any way, in any direction.
Yeah.
Interesting.
So, yeah. So
lots of food for thought.
Yeah.
I love that.
Oh, good. Great.
All right. I'm going to say bye.
Bye.